I'm Tanja K. Johnson, and this is Voices of Color, a writing podcast.
Episode 5, Pacing.
Today we're going to be talking about pacing, how you create pacing, why it affects your story, and ways to slow it down, speed it up so you can really engage your readers. And today we have a guest, Thaddeus. Tell us about yourself.
I am a science fiction writer. My name is Thaddeus Howze. I'm a science fiction writer. I write pretty much everything, but I'm primarily a science fiction writer. I create worlds. I destroy them at least twice a week, maybe 3 times on Sunday. I write for Krypton Radio, a sci-fi enthusiast podcast and media center. And I write for the Good Men Project, where we do social work and trying to help men become better men and to help men evolve for the 21st century. God knows we need it. So that's what we start with.
Wow.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I never heard of the Good Man Project.
They've been around for I've been writing for them for 7 years. I think they've been around for 8. So,
all right, cool.
I met them a year after they came into existence, and I've been writing for them ever since.
Do you write for them?
Well, I was the odd person in that I didn't write a lot of, like, when the project first came out, it was primarily about helping men through their very bad relationships. And so I wasn't really interested in writing about men's relationships because I don't have those problems.
Okay.
So for me, I wanted to talk about world problems, things that were going on and how men could interact with the world. I was a mentor. I was doing a bunch of different stuff. So I wrote articles on mentoring and interacting socially and the environment, and stuff like that. And they didn't really care for them because they weren't about relationships for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So many years passed. I would still write whatever I wanted. I'd write fiction. I'd write social media. I wrote about technology, the environment. These, again, weren't very popular until last year. And then last year I got approached to do a podcast for them on the environment. And they were like, well, we don't know if you've ever done a podcast before, but you're really good on the phones. I'm like, yeah, I've done podcasts before. I know how to do them. So I agreed to do their climate change podcast, but I said, I'm going to sit down and work up a model. And what I work up, that's what we're going to do, because I've heard your attempts before and they weren't great. So I'm going to do something I think will work for us. So give me 2 weeks to work on it. And I came up with Climate Change by the Elements, and it's been successful. We've done 17 episodes so far, and we do one a week, every week on Wednesday.
I'm going to segue us into the discussion on pacing. I want to ask you guys, how do you define pacing? What are the elements of pacing?
For me, I think pacing is just the overall, I don't want to say tone, but because I write a lot of zombies and action and stuff, so sometimes my stuff are like quick pace. Planet Dead took place in 3 days or something. But with the action and the horror, I can make that quick pace with fights and blood and whatnot. And if I ever want to slow it down, I do descriptions and emotions and things like that.
I look at pacing as the speed at which the story becomes real. It's the speed that the story takes place at. Like when you're hearing a piece of music and it starts off slow and then picks up its speed and becomes larger and louder and stronger and faster. That's pacing. That's the flow of your story. And a good writer can alter that flow and should alter that flow. Your story generally shouldn't have the same pace all the way through unless there's a reason for it, like that there's a structural reason that you are telling your story in that way. And that doesn't mean a story has to have rapid pacing or slow pacing. Pacing can vary, pacing can evolve, but there needs to be a reason for your story to evolve at a particular pace. You learn as a short story writer, pacing is critical. It's less of an issue with novels because novels you have lots of room to maneuver, so you can change your pacing pretty much chapter by chapter. But with a short story, control of your pacing is critical. What speed does the story unfold at? Does it get faster? Does it get slower? Does it get sharper? Does it get brighter? Does it get wider? These are all the things you have to do. Think of pacing like the director setting the stage for the shots. What kind of shot you're going to take in that moment? Is it going to be a widescreen panoramic shot, or is it going to be a tight, close-in, detailed shot of an eyeball? And then span out till you see the face of a dead person, and then you span out and you see the room, and you see the room that had a fight in it, and then you see the building that's on fire around all of it, and it's like, wow, that's a lot of pacing. That changes the pacing in each successive scene. That's the kind of thing we're looking for with pacing. It's how your story moves. Too fast, people get lost. Too slow, people get bored. So you got to have just the right speed for your story to take place in.
Yeah, I wanted to add that pacing also affects every part of craft and storytelling. The mood, the themes. It connects every point. If you want to really delve into one aspect of storycraft, then you're going to slow down that pacing and let it really unfold for the readers. But if you want something to be really quick and breezy, you're going to speed it up, and you're going to make the readers bite their nails and wonder what's happening next. And there's lots of different tools that you can use to either speed up this pacing and slow it down. So what tools do you guys use to affect your pacing?
I think that before one should write a story, one should write an outline, because your outline helps you set the pace, the overall pace for your story. How many scenes, how many acts, how many players. You have to get all that together. You sit down, you make a plan, you decide what you want to have happen, you decide where it's going to take place. And your outline, for me, at least in the beginning of any good story so let's say I'm planning on writing a story of about 7,000 words. I want an outline, because 7,000 words is just long enough to get lost if you're just kind of winging it. So rather than do that, if I have an outline, I have a bunch of notes, and I have a bunch of places and check marks to help me remember where I am and where I'm supposed to be. And that's my first tool to pace: a good, well-structured, well-considered outline that I will throw out the window if I can think of something better while I'm writing it, just so we're being equally, being real. I love an outline, but I will kick it to the curb if suddenly I'm inspired to write something better.
I wouldn't say that I go in with that deep of an outline. I do have key points within the story that I know I need to get to. So especially if I'm writing a short story, like we were working on that anthology a few months ago, I had each point where we met the main character, then this was her issue, and this is the killer. And I had each key point of the story. But besides that, I didn't fully break it down, but that helped me figure out the pace of the overall short story and how I wanted it to run. So I think definitely planning ahead definitely helps you with pacing.
One of the tools that I use is definitely playing around with my sentence lengths. If I want to slow it down, I'm going to increase the length of the sentence. And that really helps out to draw out the moment. You can increase the amount of detail there and really put something in a focal point. If you want to speed it up, choppy sentences, shorter paragraphs that are going to make the reader's eyes zip across the page are a good way to control the pacing as well.
I like sentence length. It's one of my favorites. When I want to make things fast, I make sentences shorter. I want things to be slow, I make them more languid. I use more eloquent language. I stress the story flow differently. I think that when you're working with action scenes, the length of your sentences makes the story move. It makes it pop. Direction, it's like I said, you're doing it like a director. You're making the sentences such that your mind wants to see and be active and look around and be around. And so you can't have long, drawn-out sentences unless there's a reason for it. And most good fight scenes I write, they're short, they're snappy, quick, because they work better that way. Sentences are longer, they have more nuance and color. And the closer you get to the fight scene, the less of the world I talk about and more about that moment in that instant. And so we shrink the camera view till it's just between the two fighters, however many fighters there are. And the sentences get shorter and leaner and faster and more dynamic. And they use different words. And they're so different, it's almost like it's a completely different scene. And then when the fight ends, the sentences start to get longer again. and the dialogue gets longer and more explaining gets done. So it's definitely one of my favorite tools after making a good outline. Sentence length matters. It does.
One of my other tools that I use is working with subplots. And this is something that you can only really play with if you're writing something novella or novel length. When you shift your story's main focus from the first main plot into the secondary plot line or the third, you're really going to decrease the pace at which the story progresses. And then the more shifts and subplots that you use, then you're going to reach that resolution of the first plot line slower. So this is a good way to lengthen the story, to increase the pacing of your story, make it longer, make it more drawn out, more tension can be added because of this added length. And it's one of my tools that I really love to use.
No, that's a great tool for novels and novellas, that especially the YA fantasy I've been working on. Adding subplots definitely strengthen the story and really help me build a lot more tension within the overall plot.
When I'm writing, one of the things that I think is really important for good pacing is the ability to throw away a whole section of something that doesn't work. A lot of times when I sit down to write something, I'll be writing, you get distracted, or maybe you start thinking you have a better idea and you may play with it for a minute, and then you come back to it later and you go, I was really reading really good till right here. And you know where that is. That's where you thought you had a new idea and you were going to play with it. And now you work that back into the story, but it really doesn't belong there. I will go back and be like, you know what? If what I wrote there is really brilliant, I'll cut it out and put it in another document somewhere else and save it. But a lot of times I just select that section. I weep for a moment, and then I kill it and say it didn't belong here. And I think nothing kills your pacing like inconsistent. You read it through for the first time and you're like, oh, this was a good idea, but it doesn't work here. Goodbye. You are the weakest link. But that's hard to do. I know I'm an editor, so I read a lot of people's writing. And so a lot of times I'll see something and I'll be reading and going along, and suddenly there's this weird segue. And you read this weird segue and it never goes into anything. It just ends. And you're like, okay, what was that about? And you go back to the story. So then first thing I do is like, hey, I don't know what you were doing right here on page 6 and 7. Read that out loud to yourself and tell me if you think we should keep that. I'm going to go with, no, don't keep that. But that, I could be wrong. You read it, you tell me why you think it's worthy, and we can talk about it. We'll negotiate. But most people, when they read it and realize they've got a pacing error, they will cut it out. And it just, you'll know the difference. You can tell when a chunk of your story is just run wrong. So the ability to excise or add as needed can make your story pacing better and more consistent. If you have a good editor is perfect for that. That's what they do. They're like, hey, man, something happened here. Your story shot off the rails, or somebody disappeared, or a story thread didn't manifest. What happened to these guys? Is that a red herring? If it's a red herring, you need to die somewhere so I can tie it off and know that they are not the bad guys. Like I read a lot of mystery stuff, and so a lot of mysteries, they use a lot of false leads and red herrings and potential endings that are not true. But you have to tie them off as the writer so that the person trying to figure out who the murderer is doesn't have them on their checklist. You do it right, they become, they tie themselves off. They either get killed or they're revealed not to be the people, or something happens that eliminates them from the list of murderers. You have to be able to do that. That's another pacing issue. Handling all those subplots, handling all those dangling things at the end. You must make sure everything resolves that needs to resolve for this book. If you don't do that, people notice. Readers notice. So anytime you're doing multiple subplots, you must tie them off. You must make them either show up again soon, show up again in the next book, but people will know if you started an idea and then you never finished it or you don't do anything with it. They will call you on it. I know.
I definitely love that. I know newer authors have so much. They tie their emotions with their work, and they don't ever want to delete anything, or they don't ever want to scrap anything. But I mean, yeah, sometimes you just gotta hack apart your story to make it better, make something that's gonna survive and last with the reader.
Yes, being able to kill your darlings is definitely a tool that all writers need to learn because you definitely have to murder them at some point.
Mhm.
So, Thaddeus, we're going to segue from pacing for a bit, and we want to talk a little bit more about you and your writing and your path and your journey. Can you tell us about one of your stories?
I write all the time. And I mean, when I say write all the time, I mean I write every day. I write
Okay.
something every day, whether it be an analysis, an essay, a short story, treatment on Quora that I write, or sometimes like today, I wrote that article on killer robots. The article was written because I saw that the military was putting out a request for an enhancement for their Atlas robot fighting system. And I was like, well, that means they really do want to make autonomous fighting robots. And I think that's the worst idea ever. So I wrote a quick little article on it, and I sold it probably within the next hour after that. I was like, yes, I love this job. I write a lot of stuff. My fiction is different, though. Generally, with fiction, I usually have to have some kind of inspiration or have some idea. Or like lately, I've been picking your Voices of Color. You guys put up little things, and it's like, oh, I could do something with that, and then I'll write something. One of the stories I just wrote, Penumbra, I wrote it based on one of your poetry slam posts that you made, and I posted it to I liked it. When I was done with it, I really liked it, so I gave it a better graphic, and I put it up on Medium. And if anybody else likes it, one day maybe I'll earn $3 or $4 for it. Well, it depends. What I've learned about fiction on Medium is that fiction doesn't make a lot of money. If you want to make money on Medium, you have to write productivity articles, write about Silicon Valley, write about how I can make you a better person, or the secret powers of Seven Subterranean Superman, and that kind of stuff, and that makes money. If you want to write fiction there, you won't make a lot of money, but you will run into a bunch of great artists and a bunch of great writers who will help you do better work. And so I do write fiction because there are great writers there, even though I don't make a lot of money on fiction there. I've got 2 books. I've written a collection of short stories called Hayward's Reach, and I have it's got probably 27 stories in it. I wrote them for one of my first 30 stories in 30 days challenges. Back when I was first learning to write, one of the things I wanted to do was to practice writing in a way that would challenge me to create something new every day. And so every year there was this contest called Story a Day May, or 30 stories in 30 days. The goal is to write one short story every day, a minimum of 50 words. A minimum of 250 words, maximum as many words as you want. And I wrote for that in the year 2011. I wrote 30 stories in 30 days, and I published all but 3 of them. The 3 I didn't publish, they didn't make the grade. They weren't good enough. They weren't bad. They just weren't good enough. And so they didn't make the cut. But the other 27 became my first book, Hayward's Reach. And then my second book was a novella based on a character that I started writing and I really enjoyed. And he's a paranormal investigator named Clifford Engram. And I started working with it and fiddling with it. And I wrote my first little short story in it. And I showed it to my wife. She's like, wow, this is really good. Is there more? I'm like, no. She says, there should be more. And I'm like, well, that's all there is. Make more. And so then she harassed me for a few months to make more. So eventually I started playing with an idea. And then the next thing I know, I had 30,000, 35,000 words. I was like, okay, here's more. And she read it and she's like, oh, we're going to make a book. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad we're making a book. Thanks for letting me know. So I turned it into a book, and I've been writing a bunch of other stuff on that character since then. And he is one of my favorite characters. I just have not been able to sit down. My life is really hectic. So I haven't been able to sit down and focus on him with the degree of attention I should. I admit I feel guilty about it.
So do you write full time then?
I am a full-time writer, but I have other jobs. I work as a consultant when willing to pay me money. I drive for Uber when people don't want to pay me money. I write for different companies. Been a freelancer for Polygon. I was a freelancer for a couple of game companies. They hired me to write backstory for their products. And so, don't laugh. That was good money.
Yeah,
It was good money.
I
I was,
believe so.
yeah. When they said, yeah, we'll pay you $1,000, like, yeah, with me? How much? Oh, send me the paperwork right away, sir. I'll sit down and look at it. And I'm telling you, when it showed up, I was all over it. I wrote and wrote, and when I sent it back, they sent me a check. I was like, oh, I I could do this. I found my true calling, writing for video game companies. So I got like two others, and I still send out. Like I sent one out just recently, trying to get on their freelance list whenever they're looking for writers to do extra stuff. Because if it's fantasy, I love it. If it's science fiction, I love it more. If it's horror, I can absolutely totally do it. Yeah, I'm a full-time writer, but writing doesn't always pay the bills. So when it doesn't, I do other stuff. I have a Patreon. I started it a couple of years ago. I admit to being very poor with it because I'm not a marketing person. I started it a couple of years ago when Patreon was just starting up and it didn't have any of this. Patreon is so different now than it was a few years ago when I first started doing it. So I basically have a really ugly page and I need to go and make it pretty again. And so I've been steeling myself to do it because I'm not a marketing. I mean, I like drawing, I like design, but I'm not really a marketing guy. I don't like to market myself. I have issues around saying, oh, my work is the greatest work that has ever been. You should read it right now. I don't do that well. I mean, I did, but I don't do it well in writing. And so I have a hard time trying to talk about my work in a way that is complimentary.
Yeah.
In a way that gets people to want to read it. And so when I'm sitting here looking at Patreon and the goal of Patreon is to say, hello, stranger, you don't know me. But if you read my work and you like it, you might want to give me some money. That feels so weird to me. I know it's what people do today, but it's so weird to me. It just is. And I've had such a hard time with it. I'm doing everything in my power to overcome it. But if Patreon could be what I want it to be, then writing is all I'd ever do. I'd get up in the morning, have a bowl of cereal, and write. That's kind of what I do now. But I would get up really enthusiastically, have a bigger bowl of cereal, and just write.
I took a stab at Patreon, and it's just if you can work it right, then it's amazing. But I personally couldn't wrap my head around it to get it to work the way that I wanted it to.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's not a friendly thing. I think it's really challenging. If you're not a marketing guy, if selling stuff to people isn't really what you live for, Patreon is a chore. I mean, I'm just going to keep it real. Yeah. But if you are a marketing person or you like talking to people, or like one of the reasons I tried to use it is I have a great big backlog of writing. So what I've been doing is slowly uploading a lot of my stuff to my Patreon because it has never been seen by, normal people. So I figure if I upload it there, people like it, they can send me money. They do. I get about $1,000, maybe $1,500 a year. It's not bad. Whether I like it or not, it is to turn it into a stream of income because the future is built on not having a full-time job. The future is going to be built on having as many strange little jobs as you possibly can because the economy is not working for all of us. It works for some of us really well, but it isn't working for all of us. And for those of us it's not working well for, this is what we have to do. So I'm going to be one of those people forging ahead, figuring out how to make streams of income viable and useful and necessary, and that they pay me in a way that I can keep doing what I want to be doing, which is writing, rather than going to work at a dead-end job that I hate with people I don't like, doing work I can't stand for 8 hours a day and driving 3 hours in traffic.
Yeah.
Who needs that? That's 11 hours that I could be writing.
I know that sometimes it's a difficult thing for fiction writers to really sit down and think of different streams of income. It's easier for nonfiction writers because they have their nonfiction book and then they could have a course and then they could consult and then they could do a webinar. I know fiction writers find it kind of difficult at times to develop other streams of income.
Well, that's why I write nonfiction stuff. That's exactly why I started writing nonfiction things, so that I would have other choices and other places, other streams of potential income. I'm even going to be working on doing more designed style work that will meet more of the needs that I'm hoping for. because it's just being a writer is a struggle if all you're trying to do is just write books, because it takes a while for your recognition to become significant. Writing books, if you're not a best-selling author, it is a challenge to get there. So
Yeah.
rather than go through that, I instead do some writing. I also do some experimentation with nonfiction writing, and I keep doing this until I build up a nice collection of, I have a nice audience. Like on Quora, I've had my work read probably, I think it's 8 or 9 million times. On the Sci-Fi Stack Exchange, I've been read 12 or 13 million times.
Wow.
So, these things hopefully will, I can start trying to turn them into either patrons or buyers of my books, as I hopefully build a nice, enthusiastic audience.
That's definitely the end goal for everybody. I know that's the guy that wrote The Martian. That's how it kind of branched off from his blog. And then people who already read the story still went out to support him by buying the book. And then it just all snowballed into
A movie deal, a very boring movie. It wasn't bad, it's just dull.
I think marketing wise, as far as Patreon goes, I felt like if I wanted to make that to work, I would have to focus all my energy on that. And that would mean I would ignore other social media aspects where I communicate with fans or just fellow horror people. And I don't think I was ready to let that go. If this year you want to make sure your Patreon goes through the roof, then yeah, you got focus on it. Video is definitely something that authors need to get more into.
Yeah.
Whether it's live streaming or you reading some chapters of your book.
Well, I suspect I can do that. That reading thing I can do. I'm not going to be on camera, though. I'll just be reading audio. Nobody needs to be looking at me. Nobody. I don't need that. I'm not from this generation that says, oh, my God, you haven't seen my 25th angle. I don't want to. I don't care. I don't think that that's attractive. And I know we have a whole society built on the vain glory of things like the Kardashians, but I'm not one of those people. So yeah, I've agreed to read a few of my stories and put them in an MP3 format, but there will be no talking head.
Mm-hmm.
There will be no face, none of that. This is just going to be me reading and you enjoying, and you're in your imagination, not staring at me, making me feel awkward. No, I'm good.
I mean, I know some Instagrammers that blow up and they pretty much just wear masks all the time. So
oh, that seems like a great thing. I walk out of my house and I can't go get a container of milk because people want to rub their flesh on me. No, I don't need that.
No,
I don't want that.
No, they don't wear masks. They just wear masks in their
in their performances.
Yeah, in their performances. So no one knows what they really look like.
Well, now that's an idea.
Yeah. So it'd be like, I would compare it to like those old school like horror hosts, Elvira and Crypt Keeper and stuff. You're like, oh, this is so and so's horror hour when you just sit down and read a book with a clown mask on.
Okay. See, I never considered that. I will give that some thought. Okay. That's a way to solve that problem.
Yes, it is.
I'm gonna wrangle us back into pacing. How can you make sure that your pacing is impacting your story the right way?
Read it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
After you write something, you read it out loud. One of the things I tend to do is I write something and then I make my wife listen to it. And she'll sit there, and she's usually a good judge. I'm reading her face is usually a good judge of whether that story is doing what it's supposed to do. If she laughs in the right places or she gasps in the right places, then I know I've done a good job. If at the end of it and she reads it and then she hands it back to me and I'm just like looking at her and then she's looking at me and then I'm looking at her, somebody went wrong. And I now have to go back and figure out where I went wrong. So reading it out loud, one of the things that you learn when you read out loud is you get the feel for the story and you get to hear it in the real world. And so when your dialogue is being spoken, if your dialogue is not true to itself, you'll hear it when you read it out loud. I think that the best way to make sure your pacing is really what you're looking for is to find some poor person and read it to them. Or worse, let them read it to you. That's usually the real tell. Because you know what you wanted. You know what you wanted. But the question is, when they read it, will they know what you wanted? If you did your job right, yes, it will sound the way it's supposed to. But if it doesn't, that means, again, something happened to your pacing. That's my way of checking to see how my pacing feels in a story. Read it aloud.
I do pretty much the same thing, except I don't read to my wife because she doesn't like people reading out loud, and she won't read it out loud to me. But what I normally do is I have an application where I'll take a chapter of the story that I'm working on. I'll upload it, and then the little computer robot boy reads it to me. And I feel I go through the dialogue. I try and make sure the dialogue sounds as realistic as it should be. And definitely hearing your words out loud, especially if you stepped away from your project for like a day or two, definitely allows you to feel the pace of the story. And you should be feeling the same emotions that you want your reader to feel when you hear it. I definitely agree with that.
My tip would be, you kind of touched on it, is to step away for a bit, to give it some room to breathe, maybe a day, two more if you're able to. Write something else in the meantime, and then come back to the story, because you already have it in your head. You know what you want it to sound like. You know what you want the story to be. But then you can make mistakes and leave out a lot of stuff that's important because you already have this world in your head and it's beautiful and colorful, and you just may not be putting it on the page the same way that it is on your head. So take a break, come back, and check it over to see if you're really, really nailing that pacing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. One author on YouTube, or BookTube as they call it, or AuthorTube, what is it, AuthorTube? Yeah, that said they put their story away for like a month or two. I don't think I could do that, but definitely stepping away from that world and kind of breaking your emotional tie helps a lot with editing and pacing and just fleshing out the story.
I think it depends on how long you write.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you're a person that can write a story every day, then, you can literally throw a story in a bag and just forget about it, because you're going to have another one tomorrow and then one after that. Right? So it's pretty easy to walk away from them for extended periods and come back to them later and see if they still feel as good. And, I've had a story or two where I wrote it and I was really enthusiastic when I wrote it. When I came back to it, it was like, not so much. This one, no, we won't be sharing this one. Nope. You're just going to go into the little pile in the back and just wait your turn. And when I have a good day, I'll pull you out and look at you and say, can I do something with this story? Does it really have the right stuff? And if it does, I read it out loud. I figure out where it went wrong and I try to fix it. But usually that's a year later. That's how long I need to sit on a piece if I need to rewrite it. An easy year.
Yeah. That's like blasphemy in the indie writers, because like right now in indie land, when it comes to novels, everybody's all about quick pace and like putting out a book every 2 months. And yeah, you say sit on the book for a year and they're just like, what?
Well, again, if you're writing at the same speed that I write,
yeah,
sitting on a book for a year is not a big deal. One of the benefits for being, having been a graphic designer is that I'm not really beholden to anybody to do anything for me once I decide a book is done. Mm-hmm. I can do my own design work. I can, I hire a painter to, paint or draw me a cover. I'll do the rest of the design work myself. I'll lay out my own book. And so I'm an independent designer. Therefore, I don't require a whole lot of anything from anybody once I decide a book is finished, other than just to do it. So that gives me a little more leeway than people who, after they deal with a book and they write the book and they edit the book and they, beta read the book. Now they've got to find someone to do their design work. They got to find someone to do their cover. They got to find someone to do their painting. They got to find someone to lay out their book. For them, there's a whole lot of extra steps. So you're right. They can't wait a year.
Yeah.
But once I do, I got everything else I need myself.
Any closing thoughts about pacing?
Sure, I do. I think anybody who wants to pace a good story should write an outline. If you've got more than 3,000 words, you need an outline. Unless you're really talented, you shouldn't work from no outline, because good pacing requires that you decide what the story is going to do while you're thinking about it and setting it up. And the core of good pacing is where you start. You start with an outline. You then decide what you want your story to do. Then you work on structuring it so that the pace is one that matches the idea of the story that you created. So pacing is critical if you've done it early enough. If you've got it done in the beginning, can't go wrong. Literally, your story will write itself. A good outline is worth its weight in gold. Everything else you do after that is just style. What kind of sentences you use, the length of your sentences, the structure of your sentences, the flow of your sentences, all that is all predicated on a good outline. So once you've got a good outline, everything else happens, and it will happen just the way you like if you do it right.
For the pantsers out there, I feel like if you need to really like sit down, maybe break down pacing, I would say, depending on what genre you're writing in, like for me, I sit down with some horror movies, and you can just break down movies and see how the pacing goes and what leads up to this event and when the tension rose and when they just ripped it out. And I write visually in my head.
Those are beautiful thoughts, you guys. I think we hit all the key points on pacing.
Wait a minute, what happened to yours? Don't you have any?
I don't have any closing thoughts. You guys did a wonderful job wrapping that up for me.
Oh.
So, audience, I have a bit of homework for you. I want you to take the scene from your manuscript with the highest stakes and turn that pacing dial all the way down. Let that shift in speed show you how pacing can affect all levels of storycraft. You can show us your homework, ask us questions, spam us on our website, thevoicesofcolor.com, or on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening. This has been our episode. Bye.